And we have a very, very special guest for you today, someone who has done so much for the Latino community, and we're so lucky to have her here at our DC studios today. We have Maria Teresa Kumar, who is the CEO and president of Voto Latino. Now, for those of you who don't already know, this month is the Hispanic Heritage Month of Action, which started on September 15th and it will go on until October 15th. And Voto Latino actually launched a campaign, a very moving campaign, to promote this month. So we're going to talk to her a little bit about that. So please send in your questions, send in your comments. We'd love to hear from you. And let's get started. So, Maria Teresa, can you tell us a little bit about the initiative behind the campaign?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I think it's very cool. I watch you guys all the time, and it's nice to actually be in your little DC headquarters. They're beautiful. I got excited when I saw it on manual, in letters. So, Voto Latino, we're always trying to cook up things to make sure that people participate. And so last year we ran a pilot program and said, hey, we're celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, where we're constantly celebrating our roots and our heritage. Why don't we combine them and actually use it as a point to bring other people together to register to vote? Because we know that September 15th through October 15th is the month for Hispanic Heritage Month, but it's also the time when we have all these deadlines. We kicked it off in September 15th with over 400 organizations participating, including Huffington Post, Latino Voices, we have Spotify, we have Twitter, and we also have all the Secretary of States, the 4 Secretary of States who are Latino, and we have the League of the Conference of Mayors. So it's a big initiative trying to get as many Latinos to participate. And it's one of those things that we're like, hey, why not? And the reason we did it was because Voto Latino, we were one of the co-founders of National Voter Registration Day, which is going to be tomorrow. So folks, tomorrow. And we basically, on the very first time we did it, we registered over 300,000 people with 1,000 organizations participating. The president recognized it as an actual holiday. And we're like, wow, so if people who have limited resources and time, if we give them a space to focus on voter registration, kind of like Earth Day, big things happen.
Right. So can you explain to us, how is being civically engaged an expression of cultural pride?
This election, more than anyone, people, more than one that I've seen recently, has questioned who's American or not. And for us to double down and say, not only are we American, but we are going to help steer the future of our country. We have 27 million people that are of Latino heritage who are eligible voters. Only 50% of us came out to vote last time. Imagine if we had 60, 70%. If we actually came in parity with the rest of the country, because we're the second largest group of Americans, we would be driving an economic agenda, an educational agenda that reflects Latino values. And what I mean by that is we have 51% of children for the first time that are in public schools, but they're also right now an exceeding in poverty rate when it comes to the issues when it comes to actually having access. So if people participate, they can drive the educational agenda of their children. Mm-hmm. If people participate, they can drive the social security of their parents. And I say they can because 44% of all eligible Latinos are under the age of 30, 44%, and the average Latino voter is a 27-year-old.
So, I mean, and I knew about this, and I read a lot of articles that talked about how, we haven't had much success in the past, in past elections, Latinos. They didn't go out to vote as much. What do you think contributed to that? And how can we make it better for this next election?
So I actually think it's the opposite. So the fact that we've actually seen a steady increase in Latino participation, and in 10 years, from 2006, when we first came out and marched in the largest civil rights marches of our nation's history, 2 million people that we helped galvanize, not only Latino, but Asian and those of African descent, to register for immigration marches. In those 10 years, we changed the national consciousness, and there's not one American who does not have an opinion on immigration. That's because we came out. The fact that we had a president sign an executive action targeting immigrants was because we actually came out by 50%. Mm-hmm. But the lesson that taught us, though, in the last 8 years is that 50% of us is actually not enough for us to change an agenda. We need 60 to 70% to be on parity so that, again, we can actually help not only shape the White House, but also shape Congress. And so while we have a long way to go, we've actually made great strides. By comparison, think of it of where the LGBT community, it took them almost 30 years to pass gay marriage. When you talk about the civil rights movement of getting the vote, it took us almost 200 years, right? When you look at a woman's right to choose, it took us 50. So in 10 years, led by young Latino millennials. They're the ones that walked out of their classrooms. They're the ones that text messaged back in 2006. They've led this movement. Now it's our turn, basically, to finish it.
Right. And speaking of, civil rights and certain things that you mentioned in that response, I saw your speech at the Election Voices event, and you spoke about, you basically confronted the media about, having Latinos or leaving Latinos out and siloing them from conversations that really affect all Americans. Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's for whatever reason, it's been very easy to basically be put in buckets, and not just Latinos, but we see it with Asian Americans, you see it with African Americans, and you see it with whites as well, of what issues they should care about. But in reality, again, if you take stock, when you talk about, for example, a woman's wage, Latina women earn the least out of every group. We earn 55 cents on the dollar on a good day of what a white male counterpart would do for doing the same job. But when you start talking about issues about wage parity, we're never in the conversation. Yet the majority of Latinas are heads of households. They have children that they have to take care of, but they're also caregivers for their parents. We have so much skin in the game when it comes to that. We have so much skin in the game when it comes to the environment, because disproportionately our children have issues of asthma. We disproportionately have skin in the game when it comes to issues of health.
They have children that they have to take care of, but they're also
We're doing live.
We're doing live. I'm trying to look at comments. I'm trying to look at the questions.
It's almost like fourth dimensional. It's very cool.
Exactly.
But so when we start talking about those issues, right? Everybody, when we talk to police profiling, I think that the tragedies that we've seen with police profiling is how rampant it is. Today, we know that young Latinos disproportionately are also getting racially profiled, and they are also getting killed by police. But most precincts around the country don't even take our data, so we don't even know what the number is. Usually when there is an incident, it's either black or white. Well, Latinos, we're blended. We're everything. So and people say, well, why should we care? Well, if we're actually trying to figure out our future, if we're trying to make policy recommendations, funding allocations, anything that has to do with Americans, if we're excluding the second largest group of Americans, the second largest, then we actually haven't figured out how to address those issues. And look, it's complex. It's not easy. It puts us in sometimes in difficult environments because we feel uneasy perhaps on these issues, whether it's gender or race. But it's also because we're growing so quickly. And if we can't find politicians that voice that complexity and give us lights to shepherd us down the right path, we're not going to capitalize on the fact that Americans are incredibly diverse. And in an increasingly global world, we want that diversity. It's enriching it. It makes us more competitive. But we need to figure out how to harness it.
Mm-hmm. You also mentioned in that speech, you told a story of a 13-year-old boy in your hometown. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about that?
It was painful. So Voto Latino, we started getting into police, we started tracking police brutality and profiling was because there was a young man who, he was 13 years old, and he was in broad daylight. He was walking around with a plastic gun that police officers mistook for a real one, and asked him to turn and basically shot him in broad daylight. Andy Lopez was 13 years old, and what culminated out of Andy Lopez was that his middle schoolers, children between the ages of 11, 12, 13, marched and went to City Hall to demand an end to these killings, and they were in turn greeted with a closed City Hall and with SWAT teams pointing guns at them. These are 11 and 12-year-olds. It didn't make national news. Why? Because we have been desensitized as an issue that belongs within strictly not part of a Latino experience, which it really is. And this happened a whole year before Eric Gardner. The fact that these young people walked and marched wasn't because he was the first one. It was more than likely they wanted him to be the last one. And the more we can collaborate and, again, create conversations around the impacts that this is having within the Latino community, African American community, Muslim American communities. I mean, we think we're left out of some of these conversations, but Muslim Americans are getting racially profiled at a record clip by everybody. The Southern Poverty Law Center recently came out about the incidences of increased bullying in schools, specifically to Latino children and Muslim Americans, because of such a terrible negative rhetoric that's happening right now in the elections.
And so tell us a little bit about tomorrow as well, tomorrow's big day. Is there anything else we need to know about National
So National Voter Registration Day, as I said, we co-founded it. We're super excited. We have over 4,000 organizations on board. The Secretary of States are on board. And the idea is to register your heart out. Voto Latino, because we're constantly trying to figure out Latino millennials and their use of technology, we created an app called VoterPal. And VoterPal, you can find it both on Android and you can find it also on the iTunes Store. And it allows you to download it. You download VoterPal, and then it takes a picture of the back of your ID. It pre-populates your form, and basically it lets you register in 10 seconds versus 10 minutes. But the cool thing about it is that it becomes peer-to-peer. So you can download it right now, Jess, and all of a sudden start registering all your friends here and colleagues at the Huffington Post, right?
After this.
Right? And start registering them, and it's super easy because the cool thing is then you'll have a leaderboard, so you'll know how many people did Jess register. But it's recognizing that we have to get this voter until the government figures out how to modernize the election system that follows like the rules like Oregon and California, where Secretary Padilla has made it automatic voter registration. Absent that, we don't have enough capacity, neither campaigns nor organizations, to register all the eligible voters, period. It's completely nonpartisan. Anybody can download it. Anybody can use it. We will make sure that you fill it out completely because we'll chase you afterwards. But more of it is just like, we know that millennials, the number one way that young people get information is from each other. Their politics from each other. Why not make sure that the onus of registering and having those conversations of participating is each other? And I talked to a lot of folks, and a lot of folks are saying, well, I don't like really either candidate, or I don't see something there for me. And my response is that this is not a typical election. This is a very asymmetrical election, where this election is very much on who's American and who is not. Mm-hmm. And if we choose to sit it out, and Congressman Elijah Ellison said it the best. Congressman Ellison said it the best. He's like, not voting is not protest, it's surrender. And the stakes couldn't be higher for our country this year.
And so immigration seems to be the number one thing that's always brought up when it comes to Latinos in this election. Mm-hmm. Are there any other issues that Latinos, feel strongly about for this election other than immigration?
So, first of all, there's tons. And, folks should know that there's actually a candidate who wants to repeal DACA. They want to take away that protection. No one's talked about it, but there are roughly 6.5 million Americans who live in mixed status families, where some member of their family is undocumented. That's a big deal. That's skin in the game. But when I say that we have skin in the game across the board, there are I should get correct, either 3 or 4 Supreme Court justices who are over the age of 77. Over the age of 77. And what issues are they talking about today? They are talking about reproductive choice. They're talking about the environment. They're talking about wage. They're talking about affirmative action. They're talking about, they're also talking about immigration. Just those 5 issues alone will set policy for the next 25 years. The next president is definitely going to appoint 1 Supreme Court justice, but may be able to be appointing 2 or 3. Right now we only have 8. We actually need 1 that needs to be appointed regardless, right? So we know that potentially the balance of power is going to lie on the next president. And that next president and the judicial pieces of judicial cases before the Supreme Court will set a tone for the next 25 years. If you're a young Latina who is 26 years old and you care about having a family, you care about how much you're getting paid, you care about going to school, and affirmative action, it helps you, you should better be well aware that this next president is going to have a fate in your future, not for the next 4 years, but the next 25.
That's strong.
No pressure.
No pressure. No pressure, but go out to the polls.
Right, yeah.
And so what about, I noticed on the page that Rosario Dawson is the co-founder of
Yep.
Voto Latino. Can you tell us a bit about her role in Voto Latino?
So Rosario and I, we met at TRL when TRL was a thing at MTV in 2004, and she, and so when it was a thing, and it was funny. Right before I met her, I had turned on the TV and I saw this great ad that MTV had done with Voto Latino by Tego Calderon, and he said it all in English, like register to vote because I can't. It was the first time I'd ever seen a political ad, and I totally got what he meant. Whereas I knew that my friends that I'd gone to high school with would have no idea what he meant. What do you mean they can't vote? And that's what made it cool. And so she had come up with a set of PSAs with another gentleman and and the tagline, "It's your country represent." I fell in love because I'd been doing politics for a long time, but I'd never seen a political ad directed to me. It was the first time that I'd ever seen an ad that said, "You're American," targeting Latinos, right? I've always felt American, right? And it was the first time it was said out loud. And so I met her, and she was very clear. She's like, "There's no money at Voto Latino. Like, there's no," and by me money, like, there's no salary. Like, there was nothing. It was a complete, and we don't know where to take it. And so I quit my job. I was working in Manhattan in the private sector. I quit my job, packed my bags, and moved back home with my mom, who was incredibly supportive, though she did not understand why I was going into the nonprofit sector. And while we started creating Voto Latino, I met incredible angels who believed in the vision. And they were unlikely angels, where they were not just, they were not just Latino, but they were Americans as well that saw the future was with us. And I've felt this journey has been sometimes really difficult because there's nothing. For the first 3 years, Voto Latino was on my credit card. Don't do that, but it was more people who actually felt that they saw themselves in it. And what we're trying to do is build the political pie of Americans and let them choose their future. And the best way to do that is by participating. Because the moment you participate, it doesn't matter which candidate it is at the end of the day, they're going to have to listen to you.
Right.
Because they're going to need to get reelected next time. And I do think that because we're the second largest group of Americans, we're also the ones that least participate. We have the most to gain and to influence and to shape the future, not just for ourselves today, but also where our parents are. I mean, we did a report with Emily's List, and we found that young Latinas around a 23-year-old cares as much about parental care than a 45-year-old's white woman. Why? Because at 23, you want to make sure that your parents are healthy and making sure that they have a safety net in case they get ill on the job, because they do really hard, they do disproportionately intense labor compared to most others, so that if they get sick, then you don't have to worry about, as a 23-year-old, do I quit school so I can go help my parents? So it's really trying to understand so that folks get information of, if I vote, then not only is it about my education, but I can influence Social Security, I can influence minimum wage. Like, it's neat.
Right. No, absolutely. So we do have a question here from Andrea Wiseman-Villani. She wants to know, what's the name of the app?
VoterPal. VoterPal. VoterPal.
VoterPal. Okay.
So you'll be able to register yourself, register your friends, and then as soon as headlines finish, we're going to send you information on polling places and polling information. It's very easy.
Perfect. We have another question too. And Ron, thanks for the question, Andrea. And Ron Lyon, he wants to know, what electoral college votes will the Latino vote change in 2016?
It all depends on participation, but we have right now, we can influence heavily in Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Nevada, Arizona, Florida, and all those are swing states, and Colorado. Those are all swing states. But for folks who really out there to really appreciate it, in Ohio, there is 3.5% of Latinos and Asians that make that electoral pool. Mitt Romney lost that election in Ohio by 2.5%. Super close. The same thing is said with Virginia, and the same thing in Pennsylvania. And one of the conversations I often hear is like, our vote doesn't matter. And my best story to illustrate that, I was in Miami a couple of years ago for a leadership summit that we do. It's called the Power Summit, and we teach young people how to basically navigate actually their jobs, has nothing to do with politics. But to make a long story short, this guy said, "Hey, do you know this guy?" I'm like, "No, nice to meet you." He's like, "He ran for office." I'm like, "Oh, that's wonderful. We need more Latinos running for office." And he's like, ask him what he lost by. I'm like, "How much did you lose by?" And he's like, "Oh, about 60 votes or so." I'm like, "Oh," I said, and he's like, "No, but ask him to who?" And it turned out that he had lost to Marco Rubio in the first election.
Wow.
So talk about a completely different trajectory.
Yeah.
And by less than 60 votes. So when people say the vote doesn't matter, it's like, I'm sure this guy's like, man, I knew 60 people, right? So it's like, so it's really, in these close races, it makes all the difference. Ferguson in 2012, they had over 51% of the population went out and voted for president. For the municipality that was going to decide the mayor, who was going to decide the sheriff, who's going to decide all of that part, only 6% came out and voted. So you can almost argue that they got the elected officials by sitting it out.
Wow. That's incredible. Well, thank you so much. This was very informational. I hope you all enjoyed it. That's all the time that we have for today. But please remember, go out, vote. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you next time.
Thanks.
One of the questions that you mentioned also, American or not feeling